Calliope Marsh is a storyteller in Zona Gale's book, Neighborhood Stories, published in August of 1914. Calliope never married and lived in a small town of Friendship Village, Wisconsin, and not unlike the town of Portage, where Pulitzer Prize winner Zona Gale spent most of her life. I leave it now for Calliope to tell her own story, A Great Tree. Friendship Village ain't ever looked much more like Christmas to my notion than it did that December in 1912. Just the right snow had come and no more, and just the right cold and no more. The moon was getting along, so it was about the night of the 25th. It was going to look up big and gold and warm over the fields and the flats, where it always comes up in the winter, just like it wanted to edge right around to get sort of a whole wide front yard for its big show, where the whole village could have a porch seat. You know, when you live in a village, you always know whether the moon is new or to the full, or where it is and where it's going. But when you live in a city, you just look up at the sky at night and say, oh, there's the moon, and go right on thinking about something else. Here in the village that December, everything was getting ready deliberate for a full moon Christmas like long ago. The moon and the cold and the snow and all of them public things was doing their best together for our common Christmas. All but us. It seemed like all of us humans was working for it separate. I was mulling this over when I walked into the post office to give Mrs. Postmaster Sykes my mail. As I handed it to her, I said, I wished I knew somebody to have a Christmas tree with. Mrs. Postmaster Sykes, looking surprised on purpose the way she always does, said, well, Calliope Marsh, ain't there enough poor and neglected folk in the world to please anybody? Well, I didn't say have a Christmas tree for. I says have one with. I don't know what you mean by that difference, I'm sure. I don't know either, but there is a difference somehow. I'd kind of like to have a tree with folks this year. Why don't you help out on your church tree? They're going to spend quite a bit of money on theirs this year. Oh, I hate to box Christmas up in a church. Why, Calliope Marsh! Oh, I didn't want to hurt her feelings. I ain't never one of those that likes to throw ideas in folks' faces and watch folks jump back. So I tried to talk about something else, but she went right on trying her best to help me out. The ward schools. Yes, they're going to have a tree this year, I hear. Well, why don't you go out and help the ward, Calliope? Oh, they'd be real glad to have your help, I know it. Oh, I hate to divide Christmas off into wards. Well then, go in with the family. Oh, any of us would be real glad to have you. Oh, we would. Come to ours. We're going to have a great big tree for the children. I've been stringing the popcorn and cutting the paper up whenever I have an odd moment. The Holcombs, they're going to have one too, and Miss Uppers and Mrs. Merriman, and even the Hubblethwaites and Abigail Arnold for her little nieces. I never saw a year when everybody was going to celebrate so nice. Oh, come on over with us, why don't you? Well, maybe I will. I don't know yet what I'll do. And I said goodbye to Mrs. Postmaster Sykes and went out into the street. What I wanted to say was, I hate to box Christmas up in a family, but I didn't dare say that yet. Tramping along in the snow, I thought over what Mrs. Sykes had said and all about those places that she'd mentioned was going to have a Christmas tree. And I looked to the houses, most of them lying right there on Daphne Street where they were going to have them. And I could see them all, one tree after another, lighted and streaming from house to house, all up and down Daphne Street, just the way they were going to look. And there were those little back streets and the houses down on the flats where there wouldn't be any trees or not much of a Christmas. Of course, as Mrs. Sykes had said, the poor and neglected are always with us. I didn't want to pounce down on any of them with a bag of fruit and a box of animal crackers and sit and watch them. Oh, that's not what I meant by having Christmas with somebody. Oh, there ought to be some place. I was beginning to think when right along where I was, by the market square, I come upon 3 children kicking around in the snow. It's on Market Square that carnivals and some little circuses and things that belong to everybody is usually celebrated. It was most dark, but I could just make out the children, Eddie Newhaven, Arthur Mills, and Lily Dorn. I spoke up. "Hello, folks. What you doing?" Arthur answered. "We was just playing. We selling a load of Christmas trees." "Christmas trees? Why, that's so. This is where they always bring 'em. Big loads for everybody, ain't it?" Eddie joined in. "They're going to bring an awful big load this year, this time, big enough for everybody in town to have one. Us and Ned Backus and the Cartwrights and Joe Tyrrell, all of them. My, what a lot of Christmas trees. Why, if they were set along by the curbstone here on Daphne Street, why, the line of them would reach all up and down town. Wouldn't that be fun?" Lily clapped her hands and said, "Oh, yes, wouldn't that be fun, with popcorn strings all going from one to the other." "It would be a grand sight." "Oh, yes." I was looking down across the market square. There, hanging all gold and quiet, like it didn't think it amounted to much, right over the big cedar of Lebanon tree in the square was the moon, crooked to a horn. Eddie said, "Once, when they was selling the Christmas trees here, they kept on selling them after dark, and they stood them around here and put a little light in each one. It was awful nice. Wouldn't it be nice if they do that all over the square sometime?" "It would be a grand sight, but one that the folks in this town would never have time for. But there's a good-looking tree there already, that cedar of Lebanon tree over there. What a grand thing it would be if that was lit up. Wouldn't that be nice?" The children set up a little shout, part because they liked the idea, part because they thought such a thing could never happen. I laughed with them and went on up the street. But all the time I was thinking something, and little ends of ideas and little jagged edges of other ideas and plans part raveled out that you have to sort of knit up again. Down to the next corner, I met Ben Corey, that keeps a livery stable and sings bass to nearly everybody's funeral and other public occasions. I spoke up. "Ben, you getting up any Christmas Eve Christmas carols this year?" He answered, shifting his body weight so that the new string of sleigh bells over his shoulder jingled. "Well, I did allow to do it, but I spoke to 1 or 2, and they don't knows they can do it. Some has got to sing to churches earlier in the evening, and they don't know they'd want to tune up all night, and most has got to be home for family Christmas. There ain't no manner of doubt about the folks would be glad to listen, is there? Provided you have the singers?" "Oh, sure. Folks shine up to music considerable Christmas Eve. It's sort of, Yes, I know. It does, doesn't it? Well, Ben Corey, you get your Christmas carol singers together and a caroling, and I'll undertake that there shan't be nothing to stand in the way of their being out singing on Christmas Eve. Is that a bargain?" His face lit up as he answered, "Why, sure, it's a bargain. I'll get 'em. I wanted to, only I didn't want to carol them any more than they wanted to be caroled. I'll get 'em." And as he continued on his way, he was shaking those bells, making them ring all the way up and down Daphne Street. revolution? There's two kinds of revolutions. One breaks off of something that's always been. You pick up the broke piece and try to throw it away and make room for something that's growing out of the other part. And most people will begin to tell you that the growing piece ain't any good, but the other part, it's the kind you have always bought, and that you better save it and stick it back on. But then, there's the kind of revolution that backs away from something that's always been and looks at it a little further off than it was ever seen before and says, let's us move a little way around and pay attention to this thing from a new spot. And real often, if you put it that way, there's enough people willing to do it because they know that they can always go right back afterwards and stand in the same old place if they want to. The very next morning, after I'd seen the children, I started out. Well, I had kind of a glow to drape around the difficulties so I couldn't see them. I went first to the storekeepers, seeing Christmas seems to hinge and hang on whatever they do. And I went to Appleby Holcomb first, because I know he'd see it like I done see it, and I wanted the brace of being agreed with. Appleby's store was all decorated up with green cut paper and tassels and turkey red calico poinsettias, and it looked real nice and tasty. And the store was full of the country trade. After he finished wrapping up a package for rich old Mrs. Wiswell, I said, Appleby, would you be willing to shut up shop on Christmas Eve? Or wouldn't you? He looked a little startled and said, it's a pretty good night for trade, you know, Calliope. Why, yes, it is. But everybody that's going to give presents to people will give presents to people. And if the stores ain't open on Christmas Eve, folks will buy when the store is open. Well, that is sense, isn't it? He knew it was. And when I told him my idea, he says if the rest would shut, he'd shut and be glad of it. Abigail Arnold done the same about her home bakery and the Geckercheck's drugstore and the others. Except Silas Sykes, that keeps the post office store. He was firm and said, if that ain't foolish woman talk, I don't know what is. You ain't got no more idea of business than so many cats. No, sir, I don't betray the public by cutting them off of one evening's shopping. It made a nice little sentence to quote, and I quoted it considerable. And the result was, the rest of them that knew Silas, head and heart, finally said, all right, he could keep open if he wanted to and enjoy himself, and they'd all shut up. I honestly think they kind of appreciated in a nice, neighborly way, making Silas feel mean when he ought to. It was a little harder to make the Sunday school superintendents see the thing that I had in my head. Of course, when a thing has been the way it's been for a long time, you can't really blame people for feeling that it's been the way it ought to be. Feelings seem made that way. Our superintendent has been our superintendent for most 40 years, ever since the church was built. And of course, his thoughts has kind of turned to bone, naturally. His name is Jerry Bemis, and he keeps a little harness shop next to the town hall that's across from Market Square. When I went in that day, he was resting from making harnesses, and he was practicing on his cornet. Oh, he can make a bugle call real nice. You can often hear it going up and down Daphne Street in the morning. I always like to hear it. It gives me kind of a nice old-fashioned feeling, like when Abigail Arnold fries donuts in the back of the home bakery, and we can all smell them on the road. I said, Jerry, how much is our Sunday school Christmas tree going to cost us? Jerry has a wooden leg, and he cannot remember not to try to cross it over the other one. He done it now, but give it up. He answered proudly, "Well, we calculate about $25. Well, what are we going to do to celebrate?" "We'll have speaking pieces. We got 20 already, and a trim tree, and an orange, and a bag of nuts and candy for every child." Well, all the other churches is going to do the same. 5 trees and 5 programs and 5 sets of stuff all around, and all of them on Christmas Eve, when you'd think we'd all want to sort of draw together instead of setting apart. Land, that first Christmas Eve, wouldn't the angels have stopped singing and wept in the sky if they could have seen what we've done to it? Hush, Calliope, there ain't no need to be sacrilegious, is there? Not a bit. We've been it so long already, worshiping around in sections like Hottentots. Well, now, do you honestly think we've all chose the best way to go at Christmas Eve for children? Filling them up with stuff and getting their stomachs upset? We had quite a talk about it, Jerry and me. And all of a sudden, while I was trying my best to make him see what I saw, I happened to notice his bugle again. And I said, "There ain't no thrill in none of it, not half so much as there is in your bugle. When I hear that go floating up and down the street, I always kind of feel like it was announcing something. To my notion, it could announce Christmas to this town far better than all those separate trimmed-up trees." Oh, why, Jerry, listen to what I just thought of. A little something had come in my head that minute, unexpected, that fit itself into the rest of my plan. And it made Jerry say, pretty soon, that he was willing to go with me to see the other superintendents, and we done so that very day. Ain't it funny how big things work out by homely means? So because the choir leader in one choir had resigned because the bass in that choir was the bass in that choir, and so they didn't have anybody to train their Christmas music, and so because another congregation was hard up and was having to borrow its Christmas celebration money out of the Foreign Missionary Fund. We got them all to see sense, and then the other 2 just joined in. The schools were all right from the first, being built like they are on a basis of belonging to everybody, same as breathing. And I had begun to feel like life and the world was just one bud longing to open. The worst, though, the worst ones, to get weaned away from the usual thinking of observing Christmas, was the private families. Oh, land. I kept saying to myself, we all of us act like we was studying kindergarten math. We count up those that are closest to us, and we can't none of us get much beyond 10. Well, not all of them was that way, though. Well, if it just happens that you live in any town, whatever, in the civilized world, I think you know about what all was said to me. On one hand, it went about like this, from Mrs. Timothy Toplady and the Holcombs and the Hupplethwaites, and a lot more. Well, land knows it'd save a lot of back-breaking work, but will the children like it? And I says, like it? Try 'em. Trust 'em without trying 'em if you want to. I would. Remember, you like to be with the children a whole lot oftener than they like to be with you. What they like is to be together. And then there were other comments like, well, do you honestly think it'll work? I don't see how it can. Anything so different. And some said, well, there ain't any harm in trying it 1 year as I see it. We can always go back to what we did. But the other side figured it out just like the other side of everything always figures it out. Mrs. Postmaster Sykes said, "Calliope, are you crazy-headed? Ain't things all right the way they've always been done?" "Well, not all of them, not wholesale, I would say." "But you can't go changing them like this. What will become of Christmas?" "Christmas don't need you or me, Mrs. Sykes, to be its guardians. All Christmas needs is for us to get out of the way." "But the home Christmas, would you do away with that?" She was almost wailing now, so I sort of turned on her. I couldn't help it. "Whose home? If it's your home, you mean, or any of the thousands of others like it where Christmas is kept, then you know, and they all know, that nothing on earth can take away that Christmas feeling and the Christmas joy as long as you want it to be there. But if it's the homes you mean, and there are thousands of them where no Christmas ever comes, you surely ain't arguing to keep them the way they've been kept." Mrs. Sykes was shaking her head. "You can do as you like, of course, and so can everybody else. It's their privilege, but as for me, I shall trim my little tree on my own with my family by the fireside. And here we will celebrate Christmas. Jenny and Nora and Father and me." "Why can't you do both? I wouldn't have you give up your fireside end of anything on earth. But why can't you do both?" Mrs. Sykes didn't rightly seem to know. At least she didn't say. But she gave me to understand that her mind ran right along in the self-same groove. 7:30. The evening of Christmas Eve. The great cedar of Lebanon trees standing down there on the edge of the market square and acting as if it had been left from some long-ago forest on purpose, had been hanging around and now had lines and lines of strung popcorn, the kind that no Christmas tree would be without, because so many folks had set up stringing it nights during Christmas week after the children were in bed. We had all of that popcorn from all the churches, Methodist and Presbyterian and Episcopalian and Baptist and Catholic popcorn, and you couldn't tell them apart. And the folks was coming. You could hear them all along Daphne Street, coming from the little side streets and the dark back streets and the streets down the flats. Some of them had Christmas trees waiting at home. The load had been there on the market square, just like it had always been for years. And a good many had bought trees. But a good many more had decided not to have any, and just to hang up their stockings and let the great big common Christmas tree stand for what it stood for. Over by the bandstand, I came on them I'd been looking for. Eddie New Haven and Arthur Mills and Lily Doran and Sarah and Molly and the Cartwrights and 8 others. I said to them, "Hey, folks, what you doing here? Why ain't you at home?" They all answered together, "For the big tree!" "Are you now? Whose tree?" I love to remember the way they answered. It was Eddie New Haven who said it. "Why, all of us's!" All of us's. I like to say it over and over again when things get too much, like saying mine and theirs. When it was 8 o'clock and there was enough gathered on the square, we done the thing that was going to be done, only no one knew how well it was going to be done. I touched the button, and from the bottom branch to the tip-top little cone, the big old tree came alight. ground long ago for this very reason, only we'd never known it. 200 little electric lights were there, colored and paid for private, though I'd done my best to get the town to pay for them, like it ought to be since it's the town street. But nevertheless, it was paid for private. Oh, it made a little come from the crowd. It was so big and so beautiful, just standing there against the stars, like it knew well enough that it was one of them, whether we knew it or not. And coming up across the flats, big and bold and low, was the moon, most full, like it belonged there. I said to myself, and glory shone around. And I stood there, feeling the glory outside and in. Not my little celebration, and your little celebration, and their little celebration, private, that was costing each other more than it ought to, but our celebration, paying attention to the message of Christmas. Oh, I was so full of it that I didn't have to see Ben Corey and his carolers come racing out of the dark. They were all fixed up in funny pointed hoods and in cloaks and carrying long staves with everybody's barnyard lanterns tied on the end of them. And they run out in a line down to the tree, and then they took hands and danced around it, singing with their voices, beautiful, all the way to the top, singing away. They sang several Christmas songs that had come out of the old country. We all appreciated them, because we still have a little bit of that living inside. Then, just after the carols died down, the thing that happened that was planned to happen, happened. Over on one side, the choirs of all the churches that I guess had never sung together in their lives before, though they'd all been singing steadily about the same thing, began to sing Silent Night, Holy Night. All up and down Daphne Street it must have sounded, only there weren't anybody so far off to hear it, most of them being right there in Market Square. They sung it without anybody playing it for them, and they sung it from first to last. And then they slipped into another song that isn't a Christmas carol exactly, but something that comes just as natural. Nearer, my God, to thee. And then some more. And after a bar or two of the first one, the voices all around began kind of mumbling and humming and carrying the tunes along in their throats without anybody in particular starting them. And then they all just naturally burst into song, too. And so, I don't know who done it, whether the choir had planned it that way or whether they just thought of it or, well, somebody in the crowd struck it up unbeknownst to himself, or whether the song begun by itself, but it come from somewhere, strong and clear and real. A song that children had been learning in school. The crest and crowning of all good, life's common goal is brotherhood. And then everybody sung, because that's a piece you can't sing by yourself. All over the Market Square they took it up, and we all sung together with the tree in our midst. Then up hopped Ethelby Hookham on a box in front of the tree, and he calls out, Merry Christmas! Merry Christmas on the first annual outdoor Christmas tree celebration in Friendship Village. When he said that, I felt, well, oh, it don't make any difference how I felt. these words was the signal for what happened next. Out on the little flagstaff balcony of the town hall, Jerry Bemis stepped out with his bugle, and he blew it shrill and clear so that it sounded all over town, once, twice, 3 times, a bugle call to say it was Christmas. We couldn't wait till midnight. We're all in bed long before that in Friendship Village, holiday or not. But the bugle call said it was Christmas just the same. Think of it! The bugle that is usually used in war. And the same minute, the big tree went out. All still and quiet, but to be lit again next year, and to stay a living thing in between. When I stepped onto Daphne Street, who should I come face to face with but Mrs. Postmaster Sykes? I was feeling so glorified over that I never thought of it being strange that she was there, but she spoke up just the same as if I'd said, "Well, I thought you weren't coming." And she said, "The children was bound to come, so I had to bring them." And I thought to myself, yes, the children know. They know. And I couldn't feel bad when I passed the post office and see Silas sitting there all sole alone, the only lit store in the street. I knew he'd be on the market square next year. They went singing through all the streets that night, Ben Corey and his carolers. Silent Night, Holy Night came from my front gate when I was most asleep. It was like the whole town being sung to by something that didn't show. And when the time comes that this something speaks clear all the time, well, I hope it ain't a very off, far time, you know.